Everyone, thanks for joining another episode of the Point of Sale Data Minute podcast. Joining me today, really excited to have Justin Belt on. He's currently deploying his data strategy and all-around data analytics expertise at Nebraska Furniture Mart. We're going to dig into the challenges that organizations have in moving from a kind of a gut feel decision-making process, the way they've always done it, into a data-focused, data-centric, and data-backed decision-making organization. Welcome to the show, Justin. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Doug. I really look forward to it.
Excellent. Yeah, I think our biggest challenge today is going to be how do we keep this to kind of the allotted 20 minutes at which I usually keep the episode. In our prior chats, we could talk for hours about this as we both have similar experiences and different at the same time. So what do you say? Let's get started and see how we make out and keeping it to kind of the 20 minutes we got booked off today.
Sounds good. Let's go.
All right. So one of the topics we discussed before the episode earlier this week is, just how challenging it is for companies to make this leap from the way they've always done it, this kind of gut feel. In my experience, it's like, oh, they've always ordered 100,000 units. They'll order 100,000 again. Kind of process or using history versus using data to make decisions, and how challenging that is. And at a high level, why do you think this is? I mean, you're talking a little bit. You're going through some of this in your current role, but I'm curious to get your feedback on why the leap is so challenging.
Well, for better or for worse, old habits die hard. And a lot of times that's because the old habits worked and they worked well. That's just how you knew how to do things. And ushering in a new way to do something with people who are experts in their role, it can be intimidating. And sometimes it's felt like it's an attempt to replace somebody, but really it's just an attempt to make somebody better. So just getting over those old habits is usually one of your first hurdles.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's something with this, perceived loss of control, or to your point, they're worried about what's the future of my job, when really at times the company's best interest is to enhance their capabilities, not take their role away, but just make them better at what they do and give them better work tools.
Yeah, I always liken it to just getting somebody to a higher level of thinking. Not saying that someone's not smart, just freeing up the minutia so they can focus on the important stuff and be confident in their decisions.
Yeah, I thought one of the things you said earlier this week again that really piqued my interest is, how organizations want to follow kind of buzzwords or trends versus really understanding what their organization's capable of.
Well, we saw that this entire year with ChatGPT. You get leaders that go off to a conference, they go, how do we use this? How do we use AI? And that's not a bad thing, but there's these fancy words that get thrown in our face from a million different angles, whether it's ChatGPT or Tableau or Alteryx or Power BI. I mean, they exist everywhere. And can't let that distract you from what your goal is, from what makes you need to be more data savvy and literate. I mean, that's the goal, not the shiny objects.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the start of this transition, at the outset, what do you think a company really needs? Like, what would be step one if someone says, okay, let's move from the fax machine era into something a little bit more robust? What are we going to do? Like, what's the first thing I want to have in place?
Well, I don't want to put any CEOs in the hot seat because I've never been a CEO, but I really believe it's executive direction, executive celebration. It really has to be championed and talked about. I know some organizations make sure they say safety like 10 times a day. Well, if you want to be a data organization, you say data 10 times a day. I mean, it has to become a fabric of your discussions.
Yeah, and I think you're bang on. I know in the programs that I work at Crunchbox that our best programs are where the executives are talking about it, using it in their management meetings every week, and asking people how they're doing or what are they going to do next based on the data. And the programs that tend to fail are the ones where there's no executive leadership looking at the data themselves and asking the questions of how the company can be better. How about, what do you think about when you build the team that's going to help lead the transition? Cross-functional, unifunctional, sits with IT. What's your feeling about that?
I don't think there's any right answer for all organizations because every business and every industry is different. I mean, I've been at huge companies. I've been at smaller, less than 1,000 people companies, and there's no one size fits all. But we're getting to an era where it has to be cross-functional, I believe, to an extent. We can't just let it sit in IT. It can't just be ad hoc by the business because this is the least technical business people. I mean, the least technical business people will ever be again, and IT people are getting way better from a business acumen. So there's this Venn diagram that is just rapidly closing, and there's a relationship there that it needs to be empowering both ways. It does have to be cross-functional, in my opinion, but to the degree that it is going to be different for every organization.
Right. And so once a brand has decided, like, hey, we want to take on this transition because there's so much data available now, like exponentially more over the last 5 years, 10 years than ever before. In my world, retailers are providing data to their suppliers, and but geez, just more volume, more attributes. There's just more information to consume. So what do we think about when brands go, hey, I want to be data savvy, or I want to be move my organization in this direction? What are some things they should consider?
I think one of the hardest first steps and probably most overlooked is once you get this feeling that you want to start moving your team or your company or your brand in that direction, is really stepping back to identifying the data that you need to become more efficient and to operate at a higher level. Because so many times you'll get into a project and you're months down the road and you have to step back and go back to your data and put a new ETL process in or something of that nature. So really doing your due diligence, bringing in all your people upstream and downstream from whatever type of project you're working on to make sure you really get that data right. So you work towards one source of truth. That's one of the biggest things is you'll get disparate, similar data sets, and you have different sets of truth where margin might mean something different over here than it does to the finance team and stuff like that. So taking the time to get the data right is really what helps you move faster in the future.
Right. And I guess that also depends too, like how data literate these departments are, right? So like a lot of folks don't know what they need, and then IT will serve something up, and then they don't know until they see it what they want.
Yep.
It's hard to
And
make
that's
that leap.
that's that's one of the harder things too, because especially when the business goes to speak to IT, a lot of times there's language barriers between the professions, and a lot of times what gets served up is just specifically what was asked in the initial question. Where so many times when you're in a project or when you're going on this journey, that initial question is going to spur four other questions, which might mean you need three other data sets. Might mean you need external data. And I would also encourage you to think about external data sooner in your journey about things that you think might be perceived gaps in how you make decisions to see if there's things out there that can help you make better decisions. Because there are, even if it's just data.gov, I mean, there are so many external sources that can really give you insight into some things that you maybe didn't think of early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you need those to kind of control those knee jerk reactions, right? All of a sudden you give someone some data and they're like, oh, let's do this.
Yep. And when that to also help mitigate those knee-jerk reactions is going back to that single source of truth and getting your data right early is really going to help solidify how far your brand or your organization can go into this journey into the data world. Because if you have to keep revisiting your data set, it's just going to chip away at the confidence over time. So it's really fun to move fast and to go get these tools and to buy these licenses and stuff like that. But a lot of times you gotta walk before you run and really get that data right.
I think that's a good transition to my next question when it comes to like funding the project. It's not just go get Power BI or Tableau or some other data visualization tool or go invest in all these data sets. But I find like a lot of brands don't understand like kind of just the overall time, energy, resources, and effort required to bring a program to
Yep.
transition.
And it might be kind of easy. I've been in this role in a previous job where we decided we were transitioning into a data visualization tool. I had experience with it from a consumer standpoint, and they're like, "Oh, you know Tableau, you're going to be our Tableau guy," and that's really where everything started for me. I'm really glad that it worked that way. But if we would have done our due diligence a little bit better, we'd realize that it takes teams and not a person. It'll really help you get things correct faster. Um, I had fun in my journey, and it really helped. It really helped formulate how I solve problems. Now I'm glad that I went through it, but it shouldn't have fallen on a single guy. It really should have been okay. How many people do we need to do this? Because it's a heavy lift. It really is, and that shouldn't be daunting. It's just you should just be aware that it's not just hey, we're in December 1st tomorrow. By Q1 of 2024, we're all going to be data literate. It takes time and it's a process.
Yeah, absolutely. And What area of the project do you think gets most overlooked? Is it time? Is it resources? Is it cost? What is it? A combination? Which one do you think leads the way?
I think it's time, and I think sometimes that's because of the language barrier between the strategy and the people that do, like the decision makers in the executive level, and they have really good ideas, but there's not always an appreciation for what needs to be done. I mean, between getting new data and UATing new data and then putting it over into a presentation layer and then getting it into Excel so people can use it. Because as much as we all like to talk about these buzzwords, we have to acknowledge that Excel might be the best software that's ever existed. And everyone's always going to want to use it. So it's just all these little steps. They take time.
Yeah, in my role, I mean, I just see like the consumers of data have no idea how much effort, ongoing effort, not just the effort to build it, but the ongoing effort to maintain it
Mm-hmm.
is
Yeah,
required to get them their 3 or 4 dashboards they want to look at each week.
that infrastructure, and I always just call it the plumbing, that does get overlooked, and it's very important because you can put in all that work and identify the data, but it also has to be reliable in its delivery. It needs to be there when you're ready to get it. So that's another component.
Yeah, I think that comes back to, and we talked about it briefly. We should probably dig into it a little more. It's just this whole concept of having an executive sponsor, right? Whether that's a CEO or the CFO or the vice president of operations or someone at a senior management level that has access to the management team to share the message, to get alignment, and to get the funds.
Yep. Oh yeah. I mean, if it's not sponsored at the top level and truly seeing the value in making that pivot as an organization, it's going to be hard to justify the funding because in a lot of projects, you'll get your initial scope of work and they usually creep up over time. So you have to be ready for those to come. That if they come to you with, hey, this is going to cost us $100,000 over 8 months to make this transition, that's where you start. You have to, there's no formula to say, hey, do you add 10% or do you add 200%? Just, there's usually something else there.
Yeah, and I think again within my programs, like I said, the executive led programs always have the best success, top down, part of their DNA, part of the way the company operates, talks, discusses, town halls, all those things. Data becomes much more front and center than anything else.
Yep.
So let's assume then we got this executive sponsor, customer is able to adopt some technology, the team is starting to learn more about being data literate and how to apply the data in their thinking in their job and in their decision making. What else do you think they need to consider when transitioning to a data first organization? Earlier we talked about, failing and humbleness, and so kind of down that path is where I'm headed.
Yeah. So I do believe, and I was asked this in a talk some other time. I don't remember specifically what it was, but they asked me one word to keep in mind as you start doing some of these projects. And I think it is to be humble. And I think that's also for like the end users, for the executive, it's for the developers, it's for the people that are doing the data analysis. Try to limit your assumptions and let the data tell you some things. Look around the corner, blend it with some other data, because there's always going to be, I see this, that validated my thought, but let's go look over here and see what correlates or what relationships do we have between some of the stuff we see going on. So just the humbleness, failing fast. Don't be afraid to say, yeah, I'm going to try that. If it doesn't work, that's going to happen sometimes. But just keep going, keep trying. I mean, to the point earlier where the data is becoming endless. I mean, don't be afraid if you just have a wild idea to blend a certain data set to see if there's anything that it does to validate your thoughts. Take the time and seek it out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's no right or wrong in a lot of this stuff until you kind of dig into it and see what exactly you can build or the results that you get. Kind of comes to your point earlier in the week about just being agile and thinking about it that way.
Yeah. Agile's sometimes way easier said than done, and especially on the development side of the world and the data and stuff like that. But you got to be agile, but not to the point where you chase the shiny objects. More agile to the point where you're challenging some of your assumptions or your current processes and stuff like that.
Yeah, because everyone approaches this with a bias, right? No one comes in with a clean slate. You're trying to prove something. A lot of times you're just trying to prove something you think has happened with the data, and you get a little sidetracked versus kind of staying.
And it comes up. a lot of times in our business intelligence projects, it comes up a lot where we have this initial idea and we thought we're going this way, and all of a sudden we had to categorize things 4 different ways that we weren't assuming early on. So
Right.
it creeps in almost everywhere.
Yeah, and then so say we've got rid of all these hurdles. We have a program in place now. Now we're down at the next layer. So we've got our executive buy-in. We build a program. We're delivering data. What have you seen work in terms of helping teams collaborate around that data, or just provide training and guidance so it becomes part of the DNA versus like just wallpaper that shows up every week, or some email that I don't read, or dashboard I no longer go to?
And this is just me personally. I say it all the time. I don't think there's ever too much access to data. Now, there's things that are specific to your company, your brand, that you can't just give access to everybody in your company. But to really empower that discovery and that experimentation that really leads to innovation, it's kind of flipping the script where historically, when we think about data and employees, we've always just said, oh, what do they need access to? And that might be these 3 data sets, and that might just be inventory data. When you start to think about, okay, what can they not have access to? I mean, we don't want to share our pricing information, stuff that's more proprietary, and you start giving greater access for people to do the experimentation. I think that's really where you show trust, and you really do put data in the fabric of your organization, because you're not mitigating like we have been historically.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In a LinkedIn post I read earlier today, trust was a big factor, right? Trust the process, trust the data.
Yep. And trust, I've run into this before. We've had a project where we built some forecasting models and stuff like that, and people took that as we were telling them that they had to order that much. Like, no, we're just trying to give you a framework that's just based around some statistics and some numbers. You still are going to make a decision, but we're just going to have a conversation about forecast says this, you say that. You're a human being. You have intuition. I want your intuition, but let's also talk about these numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. It can't just be all intuition.
Yep.
I always joke warehouses are filled with top racks of intuition.
That's a good
Right?
one.
Here's how many we're going to sell. They're now sitting on the top rack. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our talk today. Justin, thanks for your time. I think we covered a lot of great things. So I would say if we could leave with just kind of 3 tips that you would give organizations in their transition, if we summarize all this, what do we think?
Executive sponsorship. Don't be afraid to take a step back and really vet out your data. And then just be humble with challenging your processes and your assumptions, and really, really challenge the status quo.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time today. I appreciate you joining me on this episode. I think we covered a lot in 18 minutes, and we'll be posting this to all our channels. So anyone watching will be able to see a repeat of this. We'll turn it into a podcast so that it'll be available on the weekend. And again, Justin, thanks for your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
That's great. So everyone, that is Justin Belt from Nebraska Furniture Mart. Hope you got a lot of good insights out of making this transition from gut feel to a data-led organization. I think Justin provided some great tips based on his experience and current strategy he's deploying in his role. So thanks to the CHPTA and COPA for promoting today's episode. Thanks to Crunchbox for sponsoring it. On the Crunchbox website, I have a new white paper called Building an Effective Retail Analytics Program. Talks a lot about what Justin and I covered today. You can go to our website and download that. Appreciate you watching another episode of the Point of Sale Data Minute, available on my YouTube channel and your favorite podcast app. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.